Hello, I'm Jody Wolf. You're watching Expoz today, September 23, 2016, 11:37 p.m. Birmingham, and the topic, the Kandahar giant. This is the giant that you have been hearing about by Steve Quayle, L.A. Marzulli, Richard Shaw, that dates back several years. Tonight, there's some new news that has previously been hushed up and for whatever reason made this man speak up and speak out. We don't know, but he did. The Kandahar giant in Afghanistan, if you go and look at a map at Afghanistan, you have the mountains above Kandahar. Now, this is where this giant have lived. Now, going back to when the Russians were fighting the Afghans in those mountains, the Russians never mentioned a giant. For whatever reason, they never mentioned it. They had to have known of it. And but the latest information is, now you remember about the pilot that flew this thing out. Well, now we're going to have the shooter, and we're going to have the shooter tell you that he watched this giant kill his best friend. And it took a long time for the shooter to speak up. And when he did, he would only talk a moment or two and just couldn't talk anymore. And it would take them weeks to get him back to talk more. And when I say weeks, the time between 2002 and today, the first time Steve Quayle mentioned this giant that lived in the mountains in Afghanistan above Kandahar was in 2008. Steve had known about this a good while before that, but without any proof, then Steve never mentioned it, although he had hearsay. And as you know, hearsay is not a thing in court that you swear on. But let me tell you the story, if you have heard it, if you haven't. The Afghans in the villages below, keep in mind, the only travel up there are what they call goat trails. This is how the Afghans fought the Russians. They fought them on the goat trails. Now, in a deep ravine, on one side of this, you had Pakistan. Now, when the Russians fought the Afghans, they kept the roads up in the areas that they traveled. And during that time, it was okay for the Pakistanis to use this travel. But after the Russians backed out, everything finally fell apart. So the Pakistanis can no longer go use those roads in Afghanistan because they don't keep them up. They have no need to anymore. But no one from Russia ever mentioned a giant. Or did they? All right, Afghanistan. Steve Quayle. One man told him in a private meeting, and it took Steve Quayle years to present this that he had heard to a particular person who the other person heard it through. And finally, it was the pilot that flew this thing out, and he said, yes, I was there, and I flew it out. And he drew a picture the best he could of it. Now, that's what we have of that in 2008. But now we have another picture of the same story that took place in 2002. Keep in mind, the pilot said yes, in 2008 is when he first spoke of it. But it happened in 2002, and he said that as well. But no one, until they could prove it, they couldn't say anything. But apparently now there's some proof. And the proof is the pilot that's speaking up and the shooter. All right, you have a team of men that our Americans, our people, our military sends in because of this giant. This giant's killing people. This is how he lives. He eats people. He's a cannibal. He eats people. And it's a regular story by the villages below. There are certain places on the goat trail that they avoid because there's a being up there that's a giant and he eats people. So they stay away from it. But it doesn't prevent this thing coming down to them and taking what he wants. It is what he does. Keep in mind, you got a 12-foot tall, 1,100-pound giant. They're still dressed as they would dress back 2,500, 3,500 years ago. He had a 10-foot long spear with a 3-foot long on the other end of it. In other words, he can use it as a spear and use the other end almost in the same manner. He's got two weapons in one hand, okay? So, the first group of men, military, went out looking for this thing. They have 3 points. At these points, these men are supposed to call out and say, we are here. And there's a word for that, and I got to get to there. That is the rally point. The first patrol had rally points, 3 of them in total. But for some reason, they never spoke any of them. Not the first, not the second, not the third. At point 3, automatically another troop go. But this troop goes with heavy weapon, okay? One of them has a weapon that, again, will put a basketball-sized hole in someone. So the next troop of people that go in there, the first thing they came upon, which was a short distance, it wasn't that far. They saw white. It looked like bones at a distance. And they said, what the hell is this? So they get closer and closer and discover it is bones. Not only is it bones, a lot of them still have meat on them. And not only is there still meat on them, there's a lot of blood in the area. Okay. Rally point made. Called in. Told to continue. They start on in, keep going. There was not a second rally point. There was, but it was over at that time. When they got to a place, on their left was a 500-foot straight down bluff drop. Keep in mind, they're still on a goat trail. You're talking about a trail 2 feet wide. And on one side is a 500-foot straight down drop. So then they come into another area that is somewhat of a clearing, several feet, and I'm assuming 20 or 30 foot landing area. And just above that was a cave. They come into this part, rally, make contact with their guys. Then, out of the blue, something comes out of this cave, and he is big. And what surprised them was his agility. If you think you take a well-trained person who do triathlons, as lean as they are, as much as they train, how quick they can move, these people that do triathlons couldn't keep up with this giant that you would think what you would see on TV, that they may walk slow and cumbersome. They said this giant moved faster than any man could. So the first thing this giant did when somebody shot at him was took that spear and went from one place to another quick enough that they didn't see him move. That spear went into the first shooter, and he held him up in the air and then threw him. And then somebody kept saying, shoot, shoot, shoot. And then he said, the head, get the head, get the head. That's what happened. They shot and they got the head, and it took that giant down. There's going to be more on this coming out. This is a story released tonight by L.A. Marzulli and by Richard Shaw, and I don't know why I didn't hear in the story about Steve Quayle, the original man who found this story in the first place. And but I'm sure Steve Quayle has a lot to say about this. So there you go. They killed him. The man that killed him, the shooter, said he shot at his head over and over and over and hit him in the chest, starting at his chest, going up. It did kill him, but it took a lot more to kill him than it would a normal man or a normal dozen men. So you'll have more of this coming soon. The title of this will be The Kandahar Giant. And I have another short thing to tell you. Something that L.A. Marzulli is a little bit upset about, but it's part of who he is. And he's got some news to tell us. You'll hear it next. Jody Wolf Expoz.